Imagine clawing a hole into rock-hard Montana dirt with a tin coffee cup, like hiding your body behind the bloating corpse of your own cavalry horse.
Yeah, while being shot at by weapons your own army just issued yesterday.
Exactly. That is where we are starting today. Welcome to the deep dive. We built this specific session for you because, well, we know you don't just want the standard Wikipedia summary of history.
Right, you want the actual mechanics.
Yeah, the psychology, the raw truth underneath the myth. So for this deep dive, the Crazy Horse Chronicles research staff presents Reno Hill, The Night They Wouldn't Break.
We are looking at a story that it just completely shatters the neat binary way a military history is usually taught.
Oh, totally.
We're analyzing the Battle of the Little Bighorn, June 25th and 26th, 1876. But we are completely shifting the camera away from Custer's last stand.
Right, because if you look at the actual dirt, the archaeological evidence, the primary accounts, the forensic data, you start to realize Custer's annihilation might actually be the symptom, not the disease.
I completely agree.
The orthodoxy always focuses on Custer's hubris on that northern ridge. But, I'm looking at the timeline and I have to ask, is it possible the real tactical breakdown, like the catastrophic failure of the 7th Cavalry, actually started hours before Custer even engaged?
Oh, down in the valley.
Yeah, down in the valley with Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen.
It absolutely did. The tactical collapse didn't happen on Last Stand Hill. It began as a cavalry charge that just violently dissolved into a chaotic rout.
A total disaster.
Right. To understand how 340 men ended up trapped on a desolate bluff, digging graves for themselves while they were still breathing, we really have to rewind a few hours to the initial deployment.
Okay, let's look at the math and the map. It's June 25th, a scorching hot Sunday. The 7th Cavalry has been marching relentlessly.
Exhausted men, exhausted horses.
Exactly. And from a vantage point called the Crow's Nest, Custer scouts look down into the valley of the Little Bighorn River, the greasy grass, and they're looking at an encampment of staggering proportions.
The sources estimate up to 12,000 people in this village.
12,000.
Yeah, up to 12,000. Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho. We are talking about 5 distinct Lakota camp circles: the Brule, the Oglala, the Sanzark, the Minneconjou, and the Hunkpapa.
Plus a Cheyenne circle.
Exactly. They could field a fighting force of anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 warriors.
Wow. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the intelligence failure here. The Indian Bureau reported the hostile warrior force didn't exceed 800.
Right, a massive underestimation.
So the military planning by General Sheridan and General Terry was based on the assumption that the tribes would immediately scatter. It's like a modern police force preparing for a minor street protest and walking straight into, like, a division-level conventional army.
That's a great analogy. The entire U.S. strategy was predicated on catching the quarry, not fighting it. The Army just didn't believe native forces would stand and fight a pitched battle against a unified cavalry regiment.
Which is wild in hindsight.
It is. So when Custer realizes his command has been spotted, he makes a fateful decision based on that fundamentally flawed doctrine. He decides he cannot wait for Terry's reinforcements.
He thinks they're going to run.
Right. He thinks he has to attack immediately to prevent the village from dissolving into the Bighorn Mountains.
And to do that, he fractures his command.
Yes.
Just past noon, he sends Captain Benteen south with 3 companies, roughly 125 men, to sort of beat the bushes and block any southern escape route.
Right.
And he leaves Captain McDougal in the rear, guarding the slow-moving pack train containing the critical reserve ammunition.
Which becomes very important later.
Oh, incredibly important. So Custer takes 5 companies north along the bluffs, and he orders Major Marcus Reno with companies A, G, and M, about 140 men, to charge straight down into the valley and hit the southern end of the village.
Now, on paper, in a textbook, this is standard 19th century military doctrine for attacking a village. You surround the encampment, capture the noncombatants, and force the warriors to surrender.
But that geometry only works if your enemy is actually trying to run away.
Exactly. Reno crosses the Little Bighorn River around 3:10 p.m. He forms his men up, and they start trotting down the valley.
Picture the physical reality of this moment, though. It is unbelievably dusty.
Oh, choking dust.
The horses are kicking up clouds of dirt so thick it's basically acting like a smokescreen. The heat is stifling, somewhere in the upper 90s. The troopers are exhausted.
And as Reno peers through all that dust, he doesn't see people fleeing.
No.
He sees mounted warriors swarming out to meet his attack. He is about a mile from the Hunkpapa camp circle, the first teepees, when he realizes he is outnumbered maybe 5-1.
Which forces Reno into the first massive tactical pivot of the battle. He throws up his hand, halts the offensive charge, and orders his men to dismount and form a skirmish line.
Right.
I mean, I'm struggling to understand Reno's logic here.
Yeah.
He has momentum. He's leading a heavy cavalry charge. Why surrender the shock value of a mounted assault to just stand static in an open field?
Was he following flawed doctrine, or did he just panic?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a combination of rigid doctrine and sudden self-preservation. You see, the U.S. cavalry in 1876 functioned essentially as mounted infantry. You rode to the battlefield, but you fought on foot.
Right.
The doctrine dictated that a dismounted skirmish line provided more accurate, sustained fire. But the mechanics of that line are exactly what doomed his offensive capability.
Break down the math of that skirmish line for us, because this is where the command essentially kneecaps itself.
Okay, so when a cavalry troop dismounts, someone has to hold the horses. If the horses stampede, you lose your mobility, your reserve ammunition in the saddlebags, and basically your only way out.
Wow. Okay.
So standard Army doctrine required every fourth man to be a horse holder. One man takes the reins of his horse and 3 others, leading them to the rear.
It's like a modern infantry unit being forced to leave 25% of their squad behind just to guard the transport trucks while taking fire.
That's exactly it. He goes into the valley with about 140 men. The moment he orders that skirmish line, he instantly loses 35 rifles.
Boom. Just gone.
Yeah. He has roughly 100 men actually on the firing line, and he stretches them across 250 yards of open prairie.
He surrenders the initiative before taking a single casualty.
He creates a completely porous, fragile line. We're talking 1 man every 7 or 8 feet.
Transitioning from an aggressive moving force to a static, completely exposed defensive posture.
Yes.
But we have to look at this from the native perspective too, because the sources provide incredible, visceral eyewitness accounts that strip away all the military romanticism.
Oh, absolutely.
This wasn't a battlefield engagement for the Lakota and Cheyenne. It was a sudden, violent assault on their living rooms.
Right. Red Horse, a Minneconjou chief, provides this profoundly mundane detail that just makes the suddenness of the attack terrifying.
What did he say?
He recounted that it was a hot day, and he was just outside the village with some women digging wild turnips. They're literally just gathering food.
Wow.
Suddenly, a massive cloud of dust rises, and the soldiers are charging directly into the camp.
Red Horse specifically mentions the color coordination of the cavalry horses, too. The bluish-gray horses in the front row, the sorrel horses in the back.
Because Custer had forced companies to ride matching horses.
Right. So Red Horse is watching this terrifying, color-coded military machine bear down on his people while they're just holding root vegetables.
It's incredibly jarring. The women and children grabbed whatever horses they could and fled down the river into ravines, while the men frantically scrambled to arm themselves.
And the opening moves by the soldiers were utterly brutal.
Reno's Arakawa scouts and his troopers fired directly into the Hunkpapa camp. They started setting lodges on fire.
Which introduces the tragic catalyst for Chief Gall, who was a fiercely respected Hunkpapa war leader.
A terrible moment.
Yeah, the soldiers are firing blindly into the upper end of the camp, and in doing so, they kill Chief Gall's 2 wives and his 3 children.
In an instant.
In an instant, a man's entire family is wiped out by a skirmish line. Gall later recalled this moment with a quote that completely alters the psychological stakes of this fight. He said, and this is a direct quote, "which made my heart bad. I then fought with the hatchet."
Which made my heart bad. It's a phrase that encapsulates this overwhelming, catastrophic grief that instantly calcifies into unstoppable rage.
Exactly.
Gall didn't want to just repel the soldiers, he wanted to butcher them. Saying he fought with the hatchet implies close quarters, mutilating combat. By killing non-combatants, Reno's men fundamentally changed the nature of the engagement.
They made it deeply personal.
The warriors weren't just defending a position anymore. They were fighting a war of annihilation to avenge their murdered families.
So Reno is standing on this thin, static skirmish line. He has 100 men awkwardly loading single-shot Springfield carbines. And out of the dust, this fiercely motivated force of warriors starts pouring out of the village.
And they don't just meet him head-on, do they?
No, they use the terrain against him.
The warriors recognized the vulnerability of a static line immediately. They began massing in an open area shielded by a small hill to the left of Reno's line.
So instead of a frontal assault, Hundreds of warriors sweep around his exposed left flank,
threatening to get completely behind him and sever his connection to the river.
which forces the second massive tactical shift. Realizing his static line is about to be rolled up and swallowed, Reno orders his men to fall back into the timber along the river bend.
Right.
Now, on paper, moving into a natural breastwork of brush and heavy undergrowth with your back to the river sounds like a solid defensive pivot. Several officers later testify they felt they could have held that position indefinitely.
But the reality inside that timber was a nightmare.
Oh, an absolute nightmare.
The physical environment inside the timber actively degraded their command structure. The brush was so thick, Reno immediately lost visual control of his companies.
They couldn't see each other.
Exactly. Warriors, including Oglalas, led by Crazy Horse, filtered through the trees and gathered on the opposite bank of the river, firing directly into the soldiers' rear.
So they're taking fire from everywhere.
Pinned down. The air was choking with black powder smoke, the noise of thousands of firearms was deafening, and the warriors started setting fire to the brush to literally smoke the soldiers out.
You have a command taking fire from 360 degrees, potentially facing being burned alive in a thicket. And this is the exact moment Major Marcus Reno's nerve just completely shatters.
Yes.
He's mounted on his horse in a small clearing within the timber. Standing right next to him is his favorite scout, the Araucaro warrior, Bloody Knife.
A volley of fire rips through that clearing, and Bloody Knife is shot squarely in the head.
The impact is explosive. Brain matter and blood violently splatter directly into Major Reno's face and across his uniform.
We have to pause on the psychological shock of that.
It's horrifying.
You are already overwhelmed, managing a collapsing defense, and in a fraction of a second, the physical remains of the man you were just talking to are sprayed across your face.
Trauma of that magnitude physically rewires your cognitive processing in real time.
Completely. There were widespread rumors and later testimony from some of his own men that Reno had been drinking whiskey during the charge.
Yeah, that he was drunk.
Whether he was intoxicated or suffering from acute traumatic shock, his executive function just completely flatlines.
He starts issuing a series of completely contradictory orders. He orders his men to dismount. Then, almost immediately, he orders them to mount back up. Then to dismount again.
The troopers are terrified. They have no idea what their commander is trying to do.
Finally, Reno, his face still streaked with blood, shouts, "All those who wish to make their escape, follow me."
Notice the phrasing there.
Yeah.
He doesn't order a strategic withdrawal to a secondary defensive line. He doesn't establish a rear guard.
Which is basic military tactics.
Right. Mechanically, a proper military withdrawal requires a portion of your force to stay behind, laying down suppressing fire to cover the retreating men, and then you leapfrog backward. Reno doesn't do any of that.
He just spurs his horse and bulks out of the timber, initiating a panicked rout.
Wait, the official military reports often soften this, calling it a fighting retreat. But if we apply our artifacts over orthodoxy approach, what does the actual dirt tell us about how fast they were running?
Do the cartridge casing maps from the site support a fighting retreat?
The archaeological evidence completely obliterates the idea of a fighting retreat.
Really?
Oh, yeah. When forensic archaeologists map the cartridge cases found in the area of the retreat, they don't find the neat, spaced-out linear patterns that indicate a structured rearguard laying down covering fire.
So what do they find?
They find scattered, chaotic clusters of 45, 70 cases. It is the forensic signature of what archaeologists call tactical disintegration.
Tactical disintegration.
Men were firing wildly over their shoulders while running for their lives.
Native accounts describe the pursuit as being as easy as hunting buffalo. Because Reno failed to set a rear guard, the warriors just rode right up alongside the fleeing cavalrymen.
They didn't even waste ammunition.
No, they reached out, pulled soldiers from their saddles, and clubbed them in the head.
And this panicked flight funneled directly into a geographical bottleneck of pure horror.
The river.
The bank on the far side of the Little Bighorn River wasn't a gentle slope. It was a steep 8-foot vertical drop into deep water.
Imagine the physics of that. Hundreds of panicked men and massive cavalry horses hitting that embankment simultaneously. Horses are leaping off the edge, crashing down on top of other horses, and men already struggling in the river.
It's chaos.
Warriors clustered on the bank above are pouring plunging fire directly into this thrashing mass of men and animals.
It was a slaughter. In the frantic, unorganized flight from the timber to the bluffs, 38 men were killed, including 3 officers. 10 were wounded.
And some were left behind.
Right. Roughly 17 men, including Lieutenant DeRudio, never even heard the confusing orders to retreat. They were left behind, hiding in the thick timber, listening to their comrades being butchered.
Reno loses nearly a third of his command in a matter of minutes. And strategically, his decision to flee the timber changes the entire geometry of the Battle of the Little Bighorn.
It instantly frees up hundreds, perhaps thousands of warriors who no longer have to worry about their southern flank.
Exactly. They can turn their full, terrifying attention northward, directly toward Custer.
The shattered, bleeding, and demoralized remnants of Reno's battalion scramble up a steep 300-foot bluff on the east side of the river.
They are gasping for air, completely beaten, only to face the agonizing reality that they are now trapped on high ground.
This is the moment the narrative shifts from a disastrous offensive to a desperate, clinging defense on what we now call Reno Hill.
Shortly after Reno's survivors drag themselves to the top of the bluff, a second column of cavalry arrives from the south. It's Captain Frederick Benteen with his 3 companies, H, D, and K.
Benteen had been scouting the ridges, found absolutely nothing but empty dirt, and turned back toward the main trail.
Benteen topping that bluff and seeing Reno's command is a critical historical juncture. He finds absolute shambles. Men are missing, the wounded are bleeding out in the dirt, and Reno himself is completely rattled, reportedly running around in a daze, trying to find the body of his friend, Lieutenant Hodgson.
So Reno is shattered, his men are bleeding out on this hill. If you're Benteen pulling up to this disaster, your orders say go to Custer, but your eyes say if I leave, these men die.
How does a 19th century cavalry officer reconcile that mathematical nightmare, especially when he's carrying one of the most intensely debated pieces of paper in American military history?
Exactly. While Benteen was marching back toward the main trail, he was intercepted by a bugler named John Martin. Martin's horse was actually bleeding from a bullet wound when he arrived.
Wow.
Martin hands Benteen a hastily scribbled note from Custer's adjutant, Lieutenant W.W. Cooke.
The famous note. It reads, Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs. P.S. Bring packs.
It's an urgent, desperate summons.
Custer has seen the size of the village. He knows his math is wrong. He needs Benteen's 125 men, and he desperately needs the reserve ammunition carried by the pack train.
So Benteen has a direct written order to advance. But when he encounters Reno's shattered battalion, he stops. He dawdles. He does not push through to find Custer.
This decision is the crux of the controversy surrounding Benteen. Did he halt out of malice toward Custer, a man he openly despised and thought was a braggart? Or was it necessary battlefield triage?
The orthodoxy often paints Benteen as insubordinate, but let's look at the operational reality on that hill. When Benteen arrives, Reno, who outranks him, essentially begs for help.
Yeah, he says, for God's sakes, Benteen, halt your command and help me. I've lost half my men.
From a purely tactical standpoint, Benteen is looking at a destroyed battalion that will absolutely be wiped out if he abandons them to the approaching warriors.
You can't just leave them.
Furthermore, the come quick note is useless geographically. Nobody actually knows exactly where Custer is. They saw him waving from the bluffs earlier, but he vanished into the broken terrain to the north.
Shortly after Benteen's arrival, Captain McDougal labors up the hill with Company B and the slow-moving pack train. This is a massive logistical relief.
They finally have the reserve ammunition.
And their combined force is now around 340 men. But as they consolidate, a sound rolls over the ridges from the north that changes the atmosphere on the hill entirely.
Heavy, continuous firing.
The troops on Reno Hill distinctly hear it. It isn't just scattering, disorganized shots. It is heavy, crashing volleys. The sound of organized, desperate combat.
2 distinct volleys echo over the hills, which veteran soldiers recognize as a deliberate distress signal.
A coordinated attempt to say, we need you now.
And this is where the tension within the command explodes. Captain Thomas Weir, commanding Company D under Benteen, is furious. He hears the guns, he knows Custer is engaged and likely in deep trouble, and he cannot believe Reno and Benteen are just sitting on their hands.
Weir urges Reno to ride to Custer's support. Reno, still paralyzed by his own near-death experience in the valley, refuses.
Benteen sides with Reno, citing the need to protect the wounded and the packs. The argument gets so heated that Weir, completely defying military hierarchy, mounts up his company and moves out on his own.
He essentially shames the senior commanders into action.
It isn't until around 5:20 p.m. that Benteen finally follows Weir with his companies, with Reno eventually stringing out behind them.
They march about a mile north along the bluffs to a high pinnacle we now call Weir Point. From there, they can look down the valley toward where Custer is fighting. They're about 3 miles away from Last Stand Hill.
But the optics are terrible.
They see a valley choked with dust and heavy powder smoke. Weir looks through his spyglass and notices something deeply unsettling. He sees rolling hills that look oddly red in color.
Then the realization hits him.
The hills aren't red dirt. He is looking at a massive, unbelievable herd of thousands of Indian ponies.
Through that spyglass, Weir witnesses a chilling, macabre scene. He sees native warriors on horseback and on foot, shooting at items on the ground.
They are moving methodically, finishing off the wounded, firing at the dead bodies scattered across the hillside.
Historians debate exactly what phase of the battle Weir was seeing. Perhaps the final collapse of Captain Keogh's battalion on Calhoun Hill. But the overarching tactical reality is undeniable.
Custer's fight is over.
Right.
If they heard the volleys and they marched out to Weir Point with a unified force, why did they retreat back to Reno Hill? Why not push through and attempt a rescue, or at least recover the bodies?
Because the physics of the battlefield were shifting against them in real time. The massive wave of warriors that had just annihilated Custer's 5 companies was now turning around.
Oh, wow.
Having wiped out Custer, thousands of warriors, flush with victory and heavily armed with captured weapons, were now surging backward, heading directly for Weir Point.
Native accounts confirm this.
The moment Custer was dead, the cry went up to return and kill the soldiers on the hill.
The soldiers at Weir Point see hundreds of warriors rapidly ascending the north slope of their position. They have a brief skirmish, but they realize instantly that if they stay on that exposed pinnacle, they will be swallowed alive.
Following Benteen's advice, Reno orders a withdrawal back to their original position on the bluffs.
But this time, unlike the rout from the timber, it is a structured fighting retreat. Lieutenant Edward Settle Godfrey, commanding Company K, steps up brilliantly.
He sets up a rearguard skirmish line. Mechanically, he conducts a textbook withdrawal, leapfrogging his men backwards. One squad lays down suppressing fire while the other falls back. Then they swap.
Holding off the pursuing warriors while the rest of the command, the slow-packed train, and the vulnerable wounded fall back to Reno Hill.
Cut off, vastly outnumbered, and with the terrifying realization that whatever happened to Custer was utterly catastrophic, the unified command has no choice.
They fall back to the bluffs and dig in for what will become the longest, most psychologically grueling night of their lives.
This begins the true siege of Reno Hill.
Let's strip away the textbook terminology and talk about the physical reality of that hilltop as twilight falls on June 25th. It is a macabre, desperate scene.
Very desperate.
The soldiers are completely surrounded by an enemy that has just proven it can wipe out a cavalry battalion in minutes. They know they need to build defenses, but here's the logistical nightmare. The Army didn't issue shovels as standard cavalry gear.
So you have 340 terrified, exhausted men trying to move rock-hard Montana earth without tools.
What were they using?
They were using their hunting knives, their tin mess plates, eating utensils, and half-canteen halves to claw shallow rifle pits into the ground. They are literally scraping out shallow depressions just deep enough to lie prone in, hoping it will stop a bullet.
And to protect the wounded, they have to construct what is effectively a crude fortress in the center of their oval perimeter.
Right.
They build breastworks out of whatever they can find. Hardtack cracker boxes, heavy wooden ammunition crates, saddles. And in a truly grim testament to their desperation, they use the bodies of their own dead horses and pack mules to build up the barricades.
Imagine the visceral reality of that. Dragging a 1,200-pound dead animal into position, knowing its rotting, bloating body is the only thing between you and a volley of rifle fire.
It's unimaginable.
Inside this crude perimeter, Dr. H.R. Porter, a civilian surgeon under Army contract, sets up a desperate field hospital in a shallow depression. He is working by fading light, surrounded by bleeding, screaming men with virtually no medical supplies left, operating in the dirt.
As night falls, the heavy firing from the warriors finally pauses.
Yeah.
But the silence doesn't bring relief. It brings a new kind of psychological torture.
Down in the valley, the soldiers can see the glow of massive leaping bonfires illuminating the massive Indian camp.
And they can hear the sounds.
The rhythmic drumming, the chanting, the chilling, echoing sounds of a great war dance, celebrating a massive victory.
For the soldiers shivering in their shallow dirt pits, the psychological weight was crushing. Morale plummets to absolute zero.
They are isolated, completely terrified, desperately thirsty, and they still do not comprehend the absolute magnitude of Custer's destruction.
They don't know that over 200 of their comrades are lying dead and mutilated just 3 miles away.
And the command dynamics inside that perimeter are incredibly strained. We talked about Reno losing his nerve in the timber. That paralysis seems to have followed him up the hill.
Multiple survivors later described Reno as rattled, ineffective, essentially useless as a commander during the siege. He is not projecting confidence. He is not organizing the defense. He is hiding.
Which forces a massive shift in leadership. Captain Frederick Benteen, the man who dawdled on his way to Custer, now becomes the absolute anchor holding the men on Reno Hill together.
He essentially usurps command.
He strides around the perimeter in full view, completely disdaining cover. He organizes the defense lines, repositions the companies, and refuses to show even an ounce of fear.
His calm, almost arrogant bravery is the only psychological glue keeping the men from completely breaking.
But there are some incredibly dark competing accounts about what happened that night regarding Major Reno. While Benteen is pacing the lines, Reno is allegedly doing some very grim calculus.
Did Reno really propose abandoning the wounded?
Yes. It's a controversial claim, but one later admitted in writing by Benteen himself.
Wow.
The claim is that during the night, Reno pulled his officers together and proposed mounting up the able-bodied men, leaving the severely wounded and the cumbersome supplies behind, and trying to flee under the cover of darkness to escape the encirclement.
Leaving the wounded men in Dr. Porter's hospital behind. If they had done that, the wounded would have been slaughtered instantly the moment the sun came up, and the fleeing men likely would have been hunted down piecemeal in the dark.
It's an order that suggests total panic overriding basic military ethics.
It speaks to the level of psychological degradation Reno was experiencing. It was cold, desperate survival math.
Benteen and likely other officers absolutely refused the idea. They committed to staying, fighting it out, protecting their wounded, and holding the hill, regardless of the odds.
So they wait in the dark, listening to the drums, smelling the blood and the dead horses, knowing that as soon as the sun comes up, the warriors will return.
And dawn on June 26th brings exactly what they feared.
With the first hint of morning light, a single rifle shot rings out. It is the signal. Instantly, a constant deafening stream of bullets and arrows pours into the defense perimeter from all sides.
The warriors had used the darkness to creep incredibly close. They occupied the high ground surrounding the soldiers' oval perimeter.
And here is where our artifacts over orthodoxy approach really shines. The orthodoxy usually paints the native warriors as lightly armed with bows and antique muskets. But what do the modern forensic findings tell us about the native fire on day 2?
The archaeological work done by the National Park Service in the 1980s and 90s paints a terrifying picture of the actual firepower the soldiers faced.
What did they find?
The warriors were utilizing elevated positions, like a spot now called Sharpshooter Hill, to pour plunging fire down into the camp.
Plunging fire, meaning they are shooting down from above on a steep trajectory.
Right, which completely negates a lot of the cover provided by those shallow rifle pits. You can hide behind a dead horse, but if the bullet is coming from 45 degrees above you, you are exposed.
And the cartridge forensics show an incredible diversity and volume of weapons. Archaeologists found 44 caliber cases representing at least 61 individual lever-action repeating rifles, like the Henry and the Winchester model, 1873.
Let's break down the mechanics of that disparity.
Yeah, please.
The U.S. cavalryman is using a single-shot Springfield carbine. To fire it, he has to pull the trigger, flip open the breech block, manually extract the hot copper casing, reach into his belt, insert a new cartridge, close the breech, cock the hammer, aim, and fire.
That's a lot of steps.
Meanwhile, a warrior with a Henry lever-action rifle is just working a lever and pulling a trigger, pumping out around a second.
The volume of fire from the repeaters is suppressing the soldiers, keeping their heads down. But it gets worse.
The forensics also proved that the warriors were heavily utilizing captured weapons. They found hundreds of bullets fired from 45-55 Springfield carbines and 45 Colt revolvers, the exact weapons the Army used.
So they took them from Custer's men.
Yes. The warriors had stripped these guns and the ammunition pouches from Custer's dead men the day before, and were now using them to rain heavy caliber fire onto Reno and Benteen.
They are literally being shot with Custer's own bullets.
The psychological impact of realizing you are being fired upon by the weapons of your destroyed comrades must have been devastating.
The heat of the morning intensifies. The sun is baking the hilltop. The air is thick with black powder smoke. The Indians are working themselves ever closer, taking advantage of the irregular terrain and sagebrush.
They threatened to mass for a coordinated assault, particularly on Benteen's position on the south side, which is an exposed elliptical ridge held by Company H.
Benteen sees the warriors massing for a charge. Now, basic static defense dictates you hunker down and shoot back. But Benteen understands the psychology of momentum.
He knows that if he just sits there, a superior mobile force will eventually overwhelm his static position. You have to disrupt their initiative.
So he rouses his exhausted men to their feet, and he leads a totally audacious, screaming counterattack right at the massing warriors.
He charges them, standing up under plunging fire.
Yes. The sheer shock of an entrenched enemy suddenly charging breaks the warriors' momentum. It scatters their assault before it can fully launch.
And Benteen doesn't stop there. He goes over to Reno's side of the perimeter, where the men are hunkered down, taking heavy fire, and aggressively demands that Reno lead a general counterattack.
Reno, shamed into action, finally complies.
He leads the troopers, who surge up from their pits, firing as they run, and successfully drive back the encircling Sioux and Cheyennes from the immediate perimeter.
It is desperate, hand-to-hand fighting at times, but it pushes the Indians back just enough to give the soldiers breathing room. However, they are facing an enemy that bullets can't stop.
Extreme thirst.
By mid-morning on the 26th, the heat is intense. The men have been fighting in choking dust and smog for 24 hours without water.
The physiological reality of thirst sets in swollen tongues, cracked lips, the inability to swallow dried hardtack. But the real crisis is in Dr. Porter's hospital.
The wounded men are in sheer agony. Blood loss combined with extreme heat accelerates dehydration and shock. They are begging, crying out for water.
Dr. Porter tells the commanders that his patients absolutely must have water at any hazard or they will die.
The only water is down in the Little Bighorn River. And to get there, a man has to leave the barricades, slip down a steep, completely exposed ravine called Water Carrier's Ravine, cross an open space, fill a vessel while taking fire from warriors hidden in the brush on the opposite bank, and then climb back up a grueling 300-foot slope.
It is essentially a suicide mission.
But the cries of the wounded are too much to bear. 19 men volunteer. They grab canteens and large, heavy iron camp kettles.
To cover them, 4 of the best marksmen in the regiment stand up in full view of the enemy to draw their fire and shoot at any warrior attempting to pick off the water carriers.
These 19 men slip down the ravine. They dodge bullets, kicking up the dirt all around them. They reach the muddy river, plunge the kettles into the water, and then begin the agonizing climb back up that slope, carrying dead weight while under fire.
They don't get a lot of water. Much of it spills in the frantic scramble, but it is enough to wet the lips of the dying men and afford some relief.
All 19 of those men, and the 4 sharpshooters who covered them, were later awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for that run.
When you look at the ammunition consumption on the Hill, they were burning through their reserves fast. It was razor close to a total massacre.
But here is the critical difference between Reno Hill and Last Stand Hill. Tactical stability.
Despite the terror and Reno's poor leadership, Benteen maintained a structured perimeter. They had interlocking fields of fire.
The archaeological evidence of the cartridge cases on Reno Hill shows men holding their positions in structured lines, not the scattered tactical disintegration we see in Reno's Valley Retreat or on Custer's Field.
They held the line, they dug in, and they refused to break.
And just as the situation seems entirely hopeless, the dynamics of the battlefield drastically shift on the afternoon of the 26th.
Late in the afternoon, the intense, relentless firing suddenly begins to slacken. It drops to occasional pot shots from long distance.
Down in the valley, the soldiers watch as the Lakota and Cheyenne set the dry prairie grass on fire. It creates a massive, thick wall of smoke that completely screens the village from view.
And then, around 7 p.m., the wind shifts.
The smoke clears just enough for the soldiers on the bluff to witness an awe-inspiring, bewildering sight. An immense procession of people, thousands of horses, women, children, and warriors, moving in a massive, orderly column southward toward the Wolf Mountains.
The village is leaving.
The soldiers on Reno Hill watch this exodus completely confused. They don't know why the Indians are leaving. They still have no idea what happened to Custer.
They spend another terrifying night in their pits, assuming it's an elaborate trick and that the warriors will return in the morning to finish them off.
But the morning of June 27th brings a different kind of dust cloud. General Alfred Terry and Colonel John Gibbon's columns finally approach from the north.
The Indians had known they were coming and chose to withdraw rather than fight a heavily armed infantry and cavalry relief force.
The soldiers on Reno Hill are relieved. The siege is over.
There are moments of incredible joy. Lieutenant DeRudio and his men, who had been hiding in the timber for 36 harrowing hours while warriors walked right past them, miraculously emerge and rejoin the command.
But the joy of survival is instantly crushed by the grim discovery made by Terry's scouts.
Lieutenant James Bradley rides ahead and discovers the Custer battlefield. He finds the bodies of Custer and his 5 companies scattered across the ridges.
Stripped, mutilated, and baking in the sun. The survivors on Reno Hill are in absolute shock. They learn that all 215-plus men of Custer's immediate command have been utterly annihilated.
The aftermath on June 28th involves the incredibly grim chore of burying the dead. The surviving soldiers ride to Custer's field.
They have few tools, mostly just scooping out shallow graves in the sandy soil and covering the bodies with clumps of sagebrush to keep the wolves away.
And then there is the epic logistical journey to save the wounded. Captain Grant Marsh, piloting the steamboat Far West, performs an absolute miracle of river navigation.
The Far West had been moored at the mouth of the Little Bighorn. They load the 51 wounded survivors onto the steamer's deck, which they've covered in a thick bed of freshly cut grass to soften the vibrations of the engines.
Captain Marsh drapes the boat in black mourning cloth, and he pilots the boat down the shallow, treacherous Bighorn River into the Yellowstone and down muddy Missouri.
He makes a record-setting 54-hour dash covering 710 miles to bring the wounded back to the hospital at Fort Abraham Lincoln.
Wait, if we rely entirely on the men who lived to write the history, we are looking through a massive lens of survivor bias.
If Reno and Benteen had been wiped out too, if the Indians had overrun that hill on day 2, would our understanding of this battle be entirely different?
Undoubtedly, the official narrative was immediately shaped by Reno and Benteen to protect their own reputations and careers.
At the subsequent Reno Court of Inquiry in 1879, the surviving officers closed ranks.
They downplayed the absolute panic of the Valley Retreat. They claimed they couldn't hear the distinct volleys from Custer's field.
They painted their actions as the only logical choices under the circumstances, effectively covering up the ugly truths, the drinking, the cowardice, the arguments, the chaotic collapse of command.
If they had died, all we would have had were the native accounts, which the military largely dismissed or ignored for a century, and the silent archaeological evidence on the ground.
Modern historians and forensic archaeologists have had to spend decades fighting through the obfuscation of the survivors. The earth remembers what the men tried to forget.
When you look at your own leadership challenges, think about Benteen stepping up when the official hierarchy collapsed.
The Battle of the Little Bighorn is always remembered as Custer's last stand. It is this icon of mythic defeat, a tragic, romanticized painting of a man going down swinging.
But for the 340 men on that bluff, digging in the dirt with tin cups, hiding behind the bloating corpses of dead horses while their commander completely unraveled, it was not mythic.
It was not romantic. It was an incredibly gritty, unglamorous triumph of sheer survival against impossible odds. History remembers the men who died with Custer, but the history was written by the men who survived the night they wouldn't break.
If artifacts over orthodoxy history is your thing, this is Crazy Horse Chronicles. Subscribe and keep questioning the baseline.
This audio experience was generated by AI based on a curated set of historical sources, archaeological reports, and primary testimonies. The voices and analysis are artificial, designed to synthesize complex historical data into an engaging narrative format. Always consult the primary source documents for your own research. Keep digging.